Hey everybody, this is just Iron Jade, back after about, I don't know, maybe 2 years since I've last made a video, and I'm just here to talk to you about Megadeth's new news that's going to result in most likely a 2015 fall album, which I'm anticipating to be a very good album, much better than the past couple of releases, and probably one of their best efforts since probably 1994 with Euthanasia or 1992 with Countdown to Extinction. Now, first of all, for those of you that have watched my videos, I know I don't have a lot of views, but I just like to apologize for kind of disappearing off the map after recording about 4 or 5 reviews on a few albums from 2013. Um, I want to take this opportunity to really be able to go back and try and do a little better on reviews after I think that there's a lot of interpretation for me to improve from what I used to do with my reviews, and now I have a better computer, I have a bit of a better camera to record with, and I hope to upgrade if I can actually manage to get farther. But um, I'm just going to talk about speculation on the album, my opinion, and then I'm going to continue on with some other news that I find interesting. Megadeth now, as you know, in December, mid-December, Chris Broderick and Sean Drover on the exact same night would end up leaving due to musical differences with Dave Mustaine and David Ellefson, and they would be departing from Megadeth. And they are now recording their new album with us with their own side project in a band called Act of Defiance. So all luck to them that it turns out well, and I'm actually interested to hear what they do now that they can kind of get a little more technical without needing to follow a bit of the Megadeth sound. Um, Personally, before I continue, I'd just like to talk on the whole Chris Broderick, Sean Drover experience through Megadeth from 2004 and 2008 to 2014. Um, Personally, I was a fan of Chris Broderick and Sean Drover. I thought Sean Drover was probably one of the most technical drummers to ever be in Megadeth, along with Chris Broderick. I feel is, although Marty Friedman fits Megadeth better and probably the best out of any guitarist, I do feel that Chris Broderick was the most talented and most skilled guy on the left hand side of Dave Mustaine on stage. But going on that, I also feel that Sean Drover managed to not play to what he recorded live sometimes. No disrespect to Sean Drover at all. I just feel that I've listened to some songs off United Abominations and some songs off Endgame, and then when I heard live versions of them, I noticed that the drum tracks were a little more simplistic, and not to mention, I didn't find him to be exciting to watch behind the kit very well ever. Compared to guys like Jimmy DeGrasso, Nick Menza, Gar Samuelson, all those guys that played for Megadeth back all the way from the start in '83. He's really the only drummer that I've really kind of gotten bored of. Uh, Watching. I mean, like, it's cool to hear his drum playing, whatever, but he didn't really hit the drums hard, and he was kind of robotic behind the set. But nonetheless, he was a good drummer, and I wish him luck in his next project. Um, with Chris Broderick, now this one's kind of tough for me because there's not anything bad you can say about the guy, but there is. Now, some Megadeth fans say he's sloppy, he's not too accurate, but I mean, when you're playing the stuff that he has to play all the time, I mean, if you miss a couple notes when you're playing live, I mean, I can accept that. But when it comes down to it, um, I personally believe that Chris Broderick was too good for Megadeth. I believe that his talents were above Megadeth, and he had to tone himself down for the most part, besides maybe some of the endgame recordings, so he could actually fit there because he's an eight-finger tapper, he's a classical influenced self-taught guitarist, and he's incredible. I mean, Megadeth needs a shredder, they really do, but they don't need a Buckethead or a Rusty Cooley or a Chris Broderick. They need a guy like Marty Friedman or Paul Gilbert or Kiko Loureiro. I'm not saying that they need to go get those guys. I'm just saying they need a guy of that caliber, a guy that's really good, one of the best guitarists on the planet, but not considerably a guy that just constantly shreds and constantly plays, chord progressions in such a speed that it sounds incredible and orgasmic to listen to. So overall, Sean Jover and Chris Broderick had a very good time in Megadeth. When I did my review in 2013, I did say I condone Super Collider. I did say that it was a very good album. I said that should be an underrated album, and I hope to hear some stuff on the radio. Now, after a couple months of that album, um, I kind of did what I did with 13. I loved it for a couple weeks, kept listening to it for a couple months, and then after that, I started to realize what people were talking about. You know, I do believe that it's a better album than half the Megadeth fan base still does. I really do. I think there's some really high points on the album, but I also think that there's some very low points, and not low points for music in general, but low points for Megadeth as a band, for the expectations that I had after seeing the 8 or so studio updates. Um, I do believe that 13 was a better album, and that's not really a great thing to say when they put 2 months of writing effort and recording effort into making 13, and they spent an entire week on the song Never Dead. Now, Megadeth in the past two albums have had some key good songs that really show potential for this new lineup. Now, you got songs like Kingmaker, you got songs like Never Dead, you got Public Enemy #1. 13, I love that song. I think 13 was a classic Megadeth song. I know there's a lot of people that probably just overlooked it because the album wasn't great, but I mean, like, Megadeth's not in their glory days anymore, and no matter how good of an album they make, I do believe that fans are always going to look back at Rust in Peace or Countdown and say it's not as good, even if it does sound as good and it's as good quality. I just believe that those albums have such high expectations that nothing's ever going to meet it ever again. But at the same point, I'm not condoning that 13 and Super Clutter had anything close to one of the higher hits on the Countdown to Extinction. Now, personally, Megadeth has some work to do, and I know since about September of 2013, Dave announced that he wanted to write another album, which was only a few months after Super Clutter came out because of the death of the late Jeff Hanneman of Slayer. Because he said he doesn't know how long he's going to live and he doesn't want to go out without putting out as much material as he can. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing, of course, because you can take that in a way where he's just going to rush everything he does, or he's actually going to try and write some cool stuff and put everything out and be experimental. Well, he did the experimental thing. He made Risk and he made Super Collider. I mean, it doesn't get much more experimental than that, but in a way I can see when he said that Super Collider was a biopic of Megadeth, I can see, because you have the stuff that's Killing Is My Business or Peace Sells Worthy at the end of Dance in the Rain, or you have kind of the faster, thrashy version stuff that kind of would have been on The World Needs a Hero, or maybe Rust in Peace, or something like that. In Kingmaker, and then you have songs like Public Enemy #1, and those are just classic sounding songs that it's not really completely a new concept, but it's a concept that I like to listen to and see that the band can still make. Sorry about this, my camera's just having a little bit of a lighting issue here thanks to my window. But now moving on. Now, as we know, within the last week, we were told that session drummer, probably one of my favorite drummers in the world right now. I am a Lamb of God fan, and I do understand that there's a lot of Megadeth or metal fans that do not like metalcore, that do not like screamo music. So I do understand you being optimistic negatively about Chris Adler coming over from a band like Lamb of God. That's probably one of the heaviest bands in the world right now that are touring, and coming over to a band like Megadeth that's nowhere near as heavy. They are extremely heavy if they hit their top of their peak, but not to Lamb of God's extent, just because Lamb of God can be deeper and darker, because that's what metalcore consists of. Now, I'll talk about Chris Adler first because that's probably the more optimistic of the two new joined men. Chris Adler is a great drummer. He's a great filler. He's got great speed, and all along with that, what I didn't know is he was a huge fan. He took a huge influence from Gar Samuelson and the two albums that Megadeth started off with. He's always been a Megadeth fan, and I did know that Lamb of God and Megadeth were friends, but I did not know that Chris Adler loved them this much to the point where he wanted to come and record with them and thought it was a dream come true to get a chance to come drum with Megadeth. Now, I'm optimistic, I really am, because I believe that there's no way you go and hire a drummer with the skill and ability and heavy style of Chris Adler unless you're planning on making a fast and heavy album. Now, I'm not saying that this album is going to be great. I'm not saying that this album is going to be a top 3 album in Megadeth's catalog just because they got a heavy drummer back, but Megadeth is heavily off of the rhythm section, powering everything. Dave Ellefson and Nick Menza were always a good team for that, and Garth Samuelson and Dave Ellefson were always a good team for that. Obviously, everyone knows that Megadeth is driven off guitars and guitars first, and then lyrics are always a big part of Megadeth's build too. Obviously, vocals are not the strong suit, but I mean, every Megadeth fan has to like Dave Mustaine. It's just we've never heard of Megadeth without Dave Mustaine on vocals. So if you're a hardcore Megadeth fan, you're fine with Dave Mustaine on vocals. Um, but I do feel that there's a lot of drive that comes from the heaviness of albums of Megadeth and sorts from Dave Ellefson and whoever his drumming counterpart is in the rhythm section. And Chris Adler is extremely talented, in my opinion. Right now, although Chris Adler will not be touring with Megadeth at all, I do believe that Chris Adler is still probably the best drummer that will ever appear on a Megadeth song. Now, obviously, Chris Adler is kind of like Chris Broderick. He will have to tone down. There's no way that his ability is going to be completely put into a Megadeth song that's going to fit. It just doesn't work. Megadeth has the guitar ability to match Lamb of Gods, but they don't have the sound ability. Although I do feel that Dave is going to go in a direction of heaviness and speed that's going to sound something like Endgame, something that isn't variant fully to the Megadeth past catalog, but it's still heavy and thrashy, and it's still going to be awesome to listen to. Now, I've talked to people that don't really like Endgame, but nonetheless, no one can say that Endgame wasn't one of the heaviest albums in Megadeth's history, or one of the fastest, or one of the most instrumentally talented. I mean, you got songs like This Day We Fight, 44 minutes, 13:20. Even The Hardest Part of Letting Go is a cool experimental song to go from such a heavy piece and then switch right back to a soft little acoustic piece. I mean, I loved that album. I really did when I got that album. Songs like How the Story Ends. I mean, obviously it's not the best album Megadeth ever recorded, but I thought it was really great to see a band that's been around for almost 30 years in 2009 come out with such a powerful album, such a fast album, such an album with such skill on it, with great recording. I'm optimistic that Megadeth can at least match an album of that caliber, and Megadeth fans should be more than happy with that. Going aside from talking about Kiko Loureiro or Chris Adler for a second, I have to say, to all you Megadeth fans that sit out there and want to hear another Rust in Peace, Dave has nothing to prove on that asset. Dave doesn't need to sit back and say, I'm going to go back to my glory days and get Nick Menza back and get Marty Friedman back and record a bunch of songs that are similar to those of our biggest hits of Symphony of Destruction or Hangar 18, and just to get a bunch of fans. I understand you guys are asking for an album with the caliber of Rust in Peace, an album that's as impactful, but that's not going to happen. Megadeth is not a band at Metallica's level of commercial success. They are not going to have an album that sells 1,000,000 units in 2 weeks like Countdown to Extinction, or go double platinum right off the bat. I'm not saying an album that they release cannot go platinum anymore, but this is not the age for metal bands to live off their album sales. It's time for metal bands to live off their hardcore fans or the people that go and sell at their shows. And we know Megadeth can sell at every show they go on. They have fans in every part of the earth, and they have millions of fans as it is. But I do expect with the additions that this album will probably be the best album Megadeth has recorded in the 21st century. Now, who are they going to get to replace Chris Adler when they go on tour? Well, it'll have to be someone good, because I guarantee even if the entire album as a whole doesn't have too much constructive stuff, there is going to be certain parts of the album that aren't going to be played by just any old drummer. They're not going to be able to go and get some random drummer and say, hey, well, this and that, like, you just got to go and lay down these beats. No, if Chris Adler's going to record an album for Megadeth, I want a drummer to be able to come in and do his best to play to whatever Chris Adler recorded. I don't want to hear someone come in and lillygag around and start playing something that really goes along with the song but isn't anywhere near as cool as what Chris Adler can do. So I really hope, a guy like Dave Lombardo, he's still jobless. He still says he's welcome to go to Megadeth, and it would honestly be cool, because Dave Lombardo definitely has the speed and skill to at least not be as good as Chris Adler, but be able to at least get close to his ability. Now, on Kiko Loureiro, now I don't know a lot about Kiko. I'm going to be honest with you right now. Like, I really don't. Sorry about this. Kiko Loureiro, I've listened to his stuff since there was rumors from Blabbermouth that Kiko Loureiro joined. Now, Kiko Loureiro, to me, against Al Pitrelli and Glenn Drover and Chris Broderick and Chris Poland and Jeff Young, and Marty Friedman. I believe Kiko Loureiro is at the level that Marty Friedman was at, where Marty Friedman is a good shredder. He's a great guitarist. He's probably one of the top 50 guitarists to ever don themselves in media. Um, but I do believe that Kiko Loureiro and Marty Friedman both share the same amount of feeling in their play too. I've listened to some Kiko Loureiro stuff, and Kiko Loureiro uses some odd effects and stuff like that. But I do believe that Kiko Loureiro does have a good sense of feel that could really contribute to Megadeth in a strong way, because we go back to songs like Tornado of Souls or Lucretia or Five Magics or Poison Was the Cure, and between Dave and Marty, there were such cool solos that you just want to just close your eyes and listen to. And to me, I think Kiko Loureiro can do that with Dave. Now, I'm not saying Kiko is as good as Marty. I'm not saying Kiko's going to fit as well. Kiko's kind of in a more experimental kind of angry in the anger group. But I do feel that Kiko Loureiro is way closer to being a fit for Megadeth than Chris Broderick or Al Petrelli. Those guys were great guitarists, but they are not guitarists that completely fit in Megadeth. They can play the stuff that Megadeth has recorded that are fan favorites, but when it comes to recording, they don't really know how to fit Megadeth's sound as well, and I'm interested to hear Kiko go along with Dave and Chris. But in other news, really quick here, first of all, I just have to say I do believe this album will be a top 5 Megadeth catalog album, of obviously underneath Euthanasia, Rust in Peace, Peace Cells, and Countdown to Extinction. I believe it'll be the 5th best album they've ever released. I'm optimistic about them touring. I hope they still tour with whatever English metal band they were going to tour with. Hopefully Iron Maiden, because it was supposed to be a North American tour, and that would be unreal. But yesterday, Nick Menz released things about saying that he got an unfair deal and he wasn't meant to be a part of the band that was big after he had already started recording songs for the new Megadeth album and everything like that. So when it comes down to that, I know there's going to be a lot of backlash on Dave for being a dick and treating Nick Menza crappy instantly after a decade since they've last tried to do anything together. When it comes down to it, I'm kind of happy that Dave isn't going to record an album with a Glory Days lineup. You know, obviously Marty and Nick were probably in the talks, and I'm sure Marty and Nick probably would have come back. I'm sure there was a chance they were going to come back. But when it comes down to it, I'm kind of happy that we're going to get a new sound. Now, I'm not saying I wasn't extremely happy to hear that Marty and Nick might have happened. And maybe in the future, there's still that optimistic chance. But if they go and get Dave Lombardo to tour, and they keep Kiko Loureiro on for a tour, and they record a cool album, I mean, let bygones be bygones, you know? I know Nick probably has some hard feelings, but at the same part, whatever. What I don't understand is, you have your full right to say what you want in music, but I don't really believe that anyone should go into an interview and start bashing the way they were treated to the public, you know? I mean, this is one of those things that probably makes Nick Menza a less popular choice for Dave, because they've had problems in the past, you know? Nick Menza was kind of acting up with drugs and whatever. I'm not saying he hasn't improved. I'm not saying he's not still a good drummer, but I just mean between Nick and Dave, I'm sure their history, although they are friends, I'm sure there is parts that are rough patches that Dave probably finds himself hard to get by. And in the end, that might end up inflicting when it comes down to Nick Menza wanting a fair deal. But nonetheless, I do believe Nick Menza deserves a fair deal along with Marty Friedman. I think that they would be key contributors to the band. They'd record some really cool stuff. But I'm optimistic with Chris Adler recording this album. Chris Adler will do an amazing job, and I'm excited to hear it, and I hope in May we're going to get some studio updates, and I hope in early summer maybe we'll get a single after the album's done being recorded. But until then, thank you for watching. Have a good day.